But you know who did say something? With all the absence of leadership in our state, you know who did say something? Dave Reichert, a Republican running for governor. He put out a statement, saying what all of us wanted to say, which is that we're tired of watching a few people violate the rights of the rest of us and be allowed to do that. So rather than read Dave's full statement that he put out over the weekend, we asked him to come on the show today with us and talk about what he would have done in this situation if he were the governor of Washington. I was so happy to see you say something, because here I am in this vacuum of leadership where it's like, oh my gosh, this highway's been shut down for hours. Put your candidate hat aside as a citizen, as a former law enforcement officer, to see what played out on I-5 play out and not see any sort of condemnation or swift action. How does that strike you?
Yeah, it's disrespectful, to say the least, as well as unlawful and disruptive. The people who organized and participated in this protest put their interests over the interest of every one of those people and every one of those cars for 6 miles on I-5, I-90, and 520 without any thought or consideration for what might be going on in each one of those individual cars. I thought about what if there's a family that is sitting in that car with a special needs child? What if there's special medication that that person, child or adult, might need and they can't get home to get that medication? What if there is a family that's headed to the emergency room in one of the hospitals in downtown Seattle for whatever injury they might have had? What if there's a family that is headed to a funeral? In every one of those cars, there's a light of life that's happening, and they're on that freeway for a purpose. Both the protesters and the State Patrol referred to this being as an inconvenience. This is not an inconvenience. You are taking away freedom from your family, your friends, and your neighbors to make a statement. And in reality, what becomes the news is the traffic jam and the people stuck on the freeway, and whatever message you're trying to send totally gets, I think it's lost. There's another way to get your message across, your point across.
And it doesn't surprise me from this particular activist class that they don't have care and concern for how their actions impact other people. We've seen that in Seattle from roughly the same group for the better part of a decade. What strikes me more is the lack of response to it. And you can look at the Washington State Patrol and then who's in charge of the State Patrol, the governor's office. If you were Governor Dave Reichert and you saw what was playing out on the freeway, what could you do?
You go back to 1999 when I was the sheriff during WTO. Those methods worked once the sheriff's office and the Washington State Patrol were called in to help the Seattle Police Department, and working with the Seattle Police Department leadership. They were relieved when we arrived with help. It's illegal to stop your car in the middle of the freeway. It's illegal to get out and walk on the freeway in the middle of the freeway. It's against the law. If you don't heed the warnings to clear the traffic, to clear the freeway, leave the freeway, get in your car and drive away, then you understand that you're breaking the law. And we have to hold people accountable and responsible when they break the law in this way. Arrest the people, bring some tow trucks, tow the cars away, open the freeway up. We have gotten to this point because over the last several years, we have allowed people to break the law with no consequences. So the expectation of this group when they arrive at the freeway is that we're gonna drive up, block the freeway, and nothing's gonna happen. And then the police are in a position where they're going, okay, if we engage with these folks, if we try to arrest these people, there could be a physical confrontation and someone may get hurt. And now I've got to file a use of force complaint. I've also got to appear in front of a board, tell them why that I arrested why I used this force. They could be the ones charged with a crime. So I get it, but we have come this far because we've let other things go by the wayside, not arresting people. And here we are going, okay, now we've got this massive freeway pileup and we can't do anything because why? We haven't done anything before.
Yeah. So if you had been governor, your expectation would have been that after the warnings were given, the Washington State Patrol effected arrests.
Yep, I would have brought in buses. We handcuffed people, put them on the metro buses, called SPD, called of the surrounding police departments, and we would have made arrests on the freeway and opened up the freeway for those people. I totally understand the need for freedom of speech, but I do not understand why some people think that their belief, their speech is more important than the rest of those people on the freeway.
Yeah. And you mentioned, you referenced WTO, which in fairness was 25 years ago. And the public's attitudes in Seattle around police and use of force when it comes to protests and even riots, as we've seen, has certainly changed, right? And Seattle police in particular have been, for lack of a better word, neutered beyond belief when it comes to what they're able to do to get some of these situations under control. So I guess if you went in there as the governor and you told your command staff with WSP, hey, we got to arrest these people, we got to move off, you're going to face backlash from certain corners of Seattle, certainly in the activist class. And as you mentioned, police don't feel as empowered to do these things without, because they're afraid of what the consequences might be. So if we have a Governor Dave Reichert, how do you start to unwind some of the handcuffing of police and some of the really hands-off ways that these types of activists have been dealt with?
Yeah, so the first thing that we have to do is to encourage cities and counties and local governments to elect people who support police officers, right? And we saw that the city of Seattle has slowly moved in that direction with the last election of people who understand the need for law and order. That's all we're talking about. We're talking about law and order. We're talking about, again, building that relationship with the police and the community. We need to rebuild that, elect people who support cops, rebuild that connection between police and community where that trust is built up. And third, we need to clearly send the message that now that you have the support of your elected officials, and we have this partnership with people in the community who want their families to feel safe and their businesses to be safe, that there will be consequences. There has to be this expectation of, if I do X, Y is going to happen to me. The people on the freeway showed up fully knowing that they could block the freeway and there would be no consequences. And that's because that is what we have been teaching people over the last several years, is that you can commit a crime and there are no consequences. We need to begin to change that narrative and say, no, people of Washington State want to be treated, clearly get, fairly and equally by the police. You want a professional, highly professional police department, but you have to work with them in order to acquire that sort of professionalism and trust in your police department. And the police department has to have the same trust in the community. And that's when you start to move past things that happened on I-5.
Yeah. Let's end with this. You talk about this it's everything that's led up to that point that allowed them to take the freeway and believe, rightfully so, that nothing was going to happen to them. I mean, when I look at this particular group of activists, where they're pro-Palestine activists, just in the last few months, they got in the middle of a Christmas tree lighting and ruined it. They blocked traffic on a bridge in Seattle, and now they've graduated to blocking traffic for hours on the most important stretch of interstate in the state. What do you think is next now that they've gotten away with that?
Well, what I hope is next is that the leaders of our communities recognize that this is unacceptable. That's what I hope the next step is, Because if this group feels okay with blocking traffic on I-5 and inconveniencing thousands of people, then what other group will feel the same way? This could explode into this group does it one day, the next group does it another day. 5 days later, another group decides they got away with blocking I-5. I'll block I-5 too. I'll block I-90, 520, and every other major freeway. Our society is slowly devolving into a chaotic state, and we have got to begin to turn this around. And I think in at least the people that I've been speaking with across the state, the majority of people that I'm speaking with are saying, look, we want law enforcement to take action. We want people to be held accountable. We want people to be held responsible for their act. There has to be consequences. But I also hear them say, we want to have trust in our police department, and we want to build that trust with them and work together with that. Some of the people in the community do not want to have any association with the police. In fact, they'd like to see the police go away. That's not going to happen. So the alternative is work with the police department, work with the Washington State Patrol, work with the sheriff's office, and let's make this a safer community so our police officers aren't put in the position they were put in on I-5, so our communities are not inconvenienced. And it's not just an inconvenience. It's a stripping away of their freedom and their right to move about this state as freely as they want to.
Yeah. Dave Reichert, candidate for governor, we appreciate not only your time today, but we've got a governor right now who's more focused on talking about a football game tonight than what happened over the weekend. So I just appreciated someone in some position of authority saying what needed to be said about this. And I hope more leaders step up and do that. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I just the last thing I really want to emphasize is that if people look at this and they're okay with it, just pause for a second, stop for 1 second, and think about every one of those cars for 6 miles, the light of life, the families in each one of those cars, and the different purposes and or emergencies that they are involved in, and they're stuck on the freeway because a few people decided their issue was more important than anyone else's.
Yeah, it's mental. It's mental. This is a mental way of doing business, of leadership, and I say that very, very loosely. And what have I said about the issues vexing Seattle? You can attribute them to, all of them can be explained by the children's book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. And you look at the activists over the years, you know, they break in windows at a Starbucks. Oh, Starbucks is rich, no big deal. Like, no, we're not going to go after them for that. Let's excuse them for that. They break in windows and vandalize Amazon Go stores. Oh, well, that's fine. It's Amazon. Amazon's got a bunch of money. Oh, big evil Amazon and their money. They disrupt tree lightings. I remember years ago, this past one isn't the first one they've disrupted. I remember years ago, they disrupted it so much so that a children's choir had to stop singing. I mean, ridiculous stuff. And then they get away with that. And they block street corners in downtown Seattle. And oh, that's fine. It's just an inconvenience for people who are out there shopping. And the issues that they're down there protesting are much, much more important. And then you graduate to blocking bridges. And then you graduate to blocking highways. What is next? What is next? When is it enough? I saw somebody in the comments say, airport runways? What would you do? What would the federal government do if you had these sorts of activists who've been emboldened for years, who've been given slaps on the wrist, in most cases, nothing? I mean, the only ones I've seen held accountable for the actions are the people who burned police cars out in the open on camera in downtown Seattle. And even then, not even all of them were caught. So at some point, people have to say and demand of their elected leaders that we have to put a stop to this. There has to be accountability. And it's not just activists, it's criminals as well. We have gotten into this, as Dave Reichert pointed out. We've created this environment where people believe, rightfully so, that they can get away with anything because we've allowed them to get away with anything. If you give a mouse a cookie, and I am terrified at what will happen next. And meanwhile, I had Nicole continue to check social media. Bruce Harrell, silent. He's in Houston. He's at some watch party in Houston, really focused on the right things. Governor Jay Inslee, nothing. Talks about January 6th, 3 years old, won't talk about what's happening in his own backyard. Bob Ferguson wants to be governor, nothing. There's no leadership. There's a vacuum of leadership, and there is the cowardice overfloweth. It's truly bizarre. I can't wrap my mind around why this would be allowed to continue like this when no other, and again, I would just encourage people who for some reason are finding a way to justify this. Would you feel the same way if it were a bunch of Trumpers? If it were right-wingers, if it were the Proud Boys blocking off an interstate, would you feel the same way? And I know that the answer is no.